Thanks everybody for having me here. My name is Mohammed. I am CEO and co-founder of Collina. We are an AI startup, Bay Area startup. We are at Series A. We build AI quality tools. Two products we have. One is to validate the quality of data or get your data AI ready, and the other product is to validate the model quality and test and make sure it's up to standards and so on. It's doing what is expected from it. That's pretty much my introduction. We move on and we discuss all the fun stuff.
Annalisa Grander. I'm the Chief Payments Officer for First Bank of the Lake. I've been in this space now for 16 years. My youngest claims that that's before electricity. So I started my career at Bancorp, and I was fortunate to be on the building team of programs like Simple, Google Wallet, Varo, Chime, etc. And then I'm also a Cross River alumni. There seem to be a good handful of folks here. But definitely a banker, and on the banker side, work closely with the tech teams to create new programs, to build cool new stuff. And I was encouraged to ask our co-panelists here difficult questions as if I were screening them to bring them on board. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we're going to make your last panel of the day your most exciting panel. I'm Peter Piatetske, co-founder, CEO of Castellum AI. We are a screening service provider, so we help banks, fintechs, corporates, and others identify risk related to sanctions, PEPs, corruption, export control, sanction beneficial ownership, essentially things that get you fined a lot of money. Our clients include the U.S. government, Booz Allen Hamilton, and financial institutions like Lead Bank and Evolve Bank and Trust. So excited to talk about use cases in financial crime compliance and AI.
Does this work now? Okay, great.
Boom.
All right, everybody's up. So Mohammed, you mentioned Collina specializes in testing and validating AI systems. In this world of compliance that we live in, how do you ensure that AI solutions are accurate, reliable, explainable enough to satisfy both users and regulators? And earlier we were talking a little bit about how you're very much aligned with regulators, specifically within the verticals that you're focused around. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, let me take a step back and explain what is AI testing in 20 seconds. So if you get an example like autonomous, like Waymo, autonomous vehicle, and it's driving, and then they are testing how good the car in identifying a stop sign. So what you do is you give it 1 million images or videos of a stop sign, and then you check, okay, 99% is correct. So now we tested. So now, if you think about that mindset of testing, same thing for different applications. We will talk about them, whether they are AI, like Gen AI or the old AI. But if you think about that mindset, you're just dumping a lot of examples of data for the AI and then checking how good, how correct, how many correct examples it gave, right? So now if you go ahead and I am the AI engineer and I say my car is 99% accurate in detecting a stop sign, that's not really informative for anybody, because how good is the car doing when it's to identify a stop sign in dark scenario, night scenario, rain, snow? There are thousands of scenarios, different angles. So when you go ahead and say 99, which became the new 100% for data scientists now, because we know that we cannot say 100%. So when we go, all products, they say 99%. So we don't know really what scenarios are good, what scenarios are bad. The engineer doesn't know what to improve on. The regulators don't know what to approve on. So it's like really hard at this point. And that's what we did at Collina. First principle we started, that was 4 years ago, before even Gen AI. The first principle is scenario level testing. When you are testing, so that happens in the data. So if you have the stop sign images, then from the starting point, you got to break the data down into these 1,000 scenarios. Then you got to ask yourself, what are the scenarios that I need to cover? Right? Because there's unknowns. I will look at my data and I was able to break them down into 20, 50 scenarios, but is that the 100% of it? So now with that, there's more, we'll dive deeper into it. But first principle is scenario level testing. Second principle is test coverage. Have you covered all possible scenarios? So if I am a company, let's say Waymo, and then I say, okay, for the stop sign, I have documented 50 different scenarios for the stop sign. And then another competing company says, okay, for stop sign, we have documented 80 different scenarios. Probably the total will be maybe like 100 because they don't overlap and everything. So that's what we're trying to get into federated learning, not in terms of technology, but there needs to be a body like IEEE in engineering or something, the body that says, okay, for these cases, here are the unknowns that company like Waymo and Cruise and others, they have been building for years, 10 years. They have millions of scenarios. A new company coming in now, they have to spend years in this learning process. So the way we help teams, or the way we think about helping teams in the process wise, is thinking about these principles from the start, and then collaborate with regulatory bodies into identifying, like we will talk about this, we just talked about it right before the conversation here, that the FDA, in my opinion, has been one of the most advanced, or one of the most regulatory bodies that is taking the right approach, in my opinion, towards what AI is, because they are taking a step back into, instead of telling everybody, here is the exact specs that you have to do, which is a really hard job to do, they are taking a step back and said, okay, you have to identify your test coverage, and it has to be clear across everybody in the organization, and share it with me, the FDA. And then when you're testing, you have to be doing scenario level testing. Don't just test on aggregate. So in general, there are generic principles for the domain that can be generalized for each builder. And there are specific principles for the application of that domain, which now you start building the matrix. I'll give one.
Mohammed, can I jump in on the regulator point?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for those of us that are in financial services, we may have a favorite regulator, but really depends so much on if you're working with state or federal regulators. Because state regulators we're seeing have a much more conservative approach to AI. They also don't have the resources to get as educated as federal regulators. But federal regulators are also looking at this from much more of a perspective of, I want to learn. And I don't know if anyone's seen this SNL skit where some Congress folks are coming to the Department of Defense, and Department of Defense is like, hey, we are turning a person into a dog. And they're like, why, Congress is like, why are you doing this? Like, stop doing this immediately. And then DOD says, well, China's doing it too. And they're like, okay, here's all the money you need. So from a federal regulatory perspective, they are concerned about safety. They are concerned about soundness and explainability of models, but they also are looking at how competitive are our banks and our AI models internationally.
And I would say it's challenging because from a regulatory perspective, you don't regulate AI. There's so many different verticals in AI that you regulate the particular verticals. Are you regulating credit? Are you regulating HR and your different HR practices? Are you regulating marketing? Does that all roll up into one umbrella that is AI that you can regulate actively? I don't know that you can. So I expect that what we'll continue to see in this space is regulation by vertical rather than overarching technology. That's my thought anyway.
And Mohammed, what you mentioned earlier with the FDA and your focus within healthcare, right? That's a really good example where you partnered with the FDA to ensure that you have the right kind of regulatory framework and collaborating with them directly. There's many, many other verticals, as we all know, either B2B, B2C, but even across the various different use cases that are enabled via AI, all within compliance automation. So Peter, for instance, you're automating compliant processes, screenings, AML. How do you see AI evolving in this space, not only to streamline the tasks, but also to reduce the risk of false positives, for example, keeping the institutions ahead of kind of continuous change in the space?
Yeah, definitely. We like to work with banks like Annalisa. So please stop me anytime if you think what I'm saying is nonsense. So one of the panelists that was up here earlier, I think CEO of Credit Pulse, mentioned that a lot of AI solutions are solutions that are they're solutions without a problem. So we are very narrowly focused on financial crime compliance, but even that is a huge space, $60 billion market in terms of annual global spending. Within that, we are using AI to solve two very specific, narrowly defined problems. And one is data enrichment, categorization, and cleaning. And then the other one is alert decisioning. So to kind of walk through those in brief detail, if you care about risk, right, let's say make a lot of pop culture references. Are folks familiar with 1MDB? There was a movie, a book, a movie, Netflix, The Whale, right? So you have money being siphoned from a Malaysian pension fund that ends up being used to launder money in New York City to buy penthouses. So risk is global, and especially for sponsor banks that are onboarding. You onboard one fintech program, suddenly you have 47 different countries. So we collect data, risk data globally, from adverse media, from sanctions risk, from contract fraud, from just fraud in general. And when you have data that's across different languages, different formats, as a bank, you want to say, hey, I just want to screen, let's say, retail customers against fraud risk only, and if their location is in the US. And so to do that with a lot of our legacy competitors, they are, let's say, saying, we are allowing you to compare fruit for fruit. Like, okay, well, that's why you have 99.9% false positives. We use AI to narrow down what each piece of data is. So it's now a Granny Smith apple being compared with a Medford apple. I can get granular, but I want to make anyone fall asleep before drinks. So kind of essentially, the more granular you can get, the better. So that's use case one. And then use case two is alert decisioning. So when an alert does pop, and your team is reviewing them and saying, can we bring on this business or not? A lot of those alerts can be decisioned essentially by what is now known as L1. And L1 is just someone who has strong reading skills. That's it. You can hire for this role straight out of high school. Doesn't mean it's easy. It's hard, but AI can definitely do that. And so we've scoped our AI solutions to these two very kind of specific, narrow areas where we can also explain how the AI works.
If anybody's been through an audit, if there's any bankers that have been through an exam, right? And recently, especially even over the last, I would say 12 to 18 months, more and more the goalpost continues to move, right? Before, if you were a sponsor bank and you were enabling just one portion or one leg of the transaction, that was enough that you just knew where the funds are going from to where they're going to. Now, totally different world. Now you need to know the source of funds, ultimately, even if you're the aggregator or you're the FBO account. Everybody loves a good FBO account. But still, now more and more, you need to have view and have ownership often of the full view, end to end of the transaction, the source of funds, so ultimately who the end beneficiary is, which is complicated and difficult in a very complex fintech ecosystem where there are so many enablers. Are there any best practices that you can share when you think about kind of standing up your products, and how do you make sure that you're staying aligned with those types of either continuous evolving regulations or recommendations even from the regulators? Is there anything that you can share, either Peter or Mohammed, and then Annalisa, if you can also add to what you're hearing on that front?
Honestly, I want to punt on this one to you directly.
Sure.
Because I feel like you're the client. We might come in and say, hey, these are the two solutions that we have. How would you scope what we do?
Yeah, I would say particularly in the AI space, the most important tenet is transparency. So a few years back, a lot of the conversations were, okay, that's lovely. You're using an AI model to underwrite. We need to understand how the model works. Well, it's proprietary. If we provide that information to you, then that's really the entirety of our value add. Nowadays, that doesn't work for the regulators, and because it doesn't work for the regulators, it can't work for the banks. And whether that's loan processing, whether that's AML, whether that's transaction monitoring in any sense, or customer onboarding. So that transparency needs to exist really from end to end.
Yeah, I'll just I'll add one more thing to this, because we work with engineers all the time, and then they tell us what is good enough. That everybody, not just the regulators, are fighting back or fighting against the engineers. And engineers, I don't see this going this way, but everybody's trying to figure this out on their own. The regulators are trying to figure this out. It's new technology and it's moving fast. We have to catch up. The engineers on their own, they want to build high quality products because for their own company and for the customers and product and so on. So the biggest question that we get all the time is the data scientists are asking us, what is good enough? We like we said, we established there's no 100% in AI. So is 90% good enough? Is 91, 92? When do we stop and we say, okay, this is a high quality product? So the first thing we started doing is we wanted to work with regulatory bodies we start with the FDA, and then we're going to each other domains to build quality standards for AI. And these have to be at the application level, not at the technology level. It's not like the AI or LM. It has to be this parameters. We've seen a lot of stuff like this, and it kind of stresses everybody out. It's like, okay, you can't use more than computing power more than this. And so I feel like this is not the right way, or not the straightforward way of regulating this. The straightforward way is look at the application, and then if I'm building a chatbot for my bank versus I'm building an AI agent that approves loans, the tolerance here is completely different. So if it's a chatbot for a customer support, and then it makes a mistake here and there, it should be acceptable if it responds latency here like in 10 seconds versus in 2 seconds. So the quality standards here, like engineers need to give me some standards, and I will build to. The engineers are best at this. Give me standards, and I'll build towards these standards. So from our end, what we wanted to do is when we're doing this with one domain at a time is we embed these quality standards in the tool that the engineers are using to build their products with. So that if you take back the example of Waymo example, or like the stop sign example, you go in and you have your data, you throw in a million images, and it analyzes your images and tells you, okay, your images cover 30 out of the possible 100 known cases. Go collect this data, right? So same thing here for accepting loans. Like if my model is 99% accurate in accepting loans for the right people is not enough, but I need to know for different race, for different gender, for different geographical and different age, and then that's the matrix of those. It becomes really quickly hundreds of cases for just one application like this one. We need to build standards for this, share the standards with the regulatory bodies, share the standards with the engineers. I believe things will be much straightforward in this conversation in general.
But just jump in on that one. Knowing it's really what you have highlighted in terms of explainability. And especially in the financial crime compliance space, you are buying trust and safety. You're not just buying API calls. You are buying trust and safety. You are buying reliability. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "I'm so excited to buy from a compliance vendor." It doesn't happen. I am one. I wish that was the case. It's not. But if you're looking to comply and make your regulators happy, if you look at most consent orders related to financial crime compliance, they actually do not have a fine. There's a consent order that says, hey, please improve, or you need to do a look back, but there is not a fine. And that's because the bank in question was able to explain why they did something. So to kind of both my co-panelists' points, explainability. If you have a model and it makes a mistake, but you can say, hey, this is how our model works, you might get a slap on the wrist, or you might be told, hey, stop using that model. But you'll be able to say, we took time to understand how it works, and we can explain to you why it happened. If your answer is we bought something that's proprietary and we don't know how it works, you will get a fine.
I love the framing around you're buying trust and safety. And you don't go out every day and say, I want to buy a compliance platform or kind of vendor. I don't want. But Annalisa, that's something probably that you do often, right? Is look at different compliance platforms, pieces of technology to either kind of partner with or to integrate with. What have you seen as being some of the biggest challenges, or maybe what are some of the harder questions? We mentioned hard questions earlier that you ask when trying to partner with a technology provider, particularly in the compliance kind of automation space, right? Whether it's from onset onboarding, or maybe there's been integration. Like, what has your experience been? What are some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, the biggest challenges is really ties back to Mohammed's conversation around accuracy. So if I tell a regulator, well, this loan underwriting model had 90% accuracy, so really, should only be disparate impact in about 10% of the total cases we're underwriting. That's a really quick civil money penalty for the bank, and probably termination of my job and everybody under me. So it's really trying to align with vendors that understand the risk tolerance that a bank has and why, and how to create scenarios that can help prevent some of the issues that banks are most attuned to. And it's usually, it's usually regulatory. What's most challenging is trying to anticipate what your data looks like 5 years from now. So I set these standards today. I'm working with these vendors. I selected from these three because they seem to be the most legitimate. They seem to have the most experience, but what does your data look like 5 years from now. And that's what's truly telling. And that's what's really challenging, that unless you can do true market research where you can compare one CIP vendor to another, and do that comparison for 5 years across 10 different vendors, you can't get solid data. So that's our biggest challenge, is trying to anticipate.
So, often when we think about AI more broadly, right, when it's discussed in the broader kind of outside of even fintech or any kind of technology value proposition within our space, the sense is that AI is going to replace humans, and there's this overarching kind of fear that a lot of jobs are going to be displaced. But I think for us within our space, we're trying to automate, right, and ensure that there's less touch points. We're trying to ensure that there's higher levels of efficacy because technology is we're leaning in on that front. Are there areas where you need a little bit more human touch points, for instance, within high risk industries, politically exposed persons, for example? Are there specific places where you see human oversight is still very much needed, and more so than in others? This is for anybody who wants.
I could start by saying customer support. The chatbots drive me absolutely nuts. By the time I'm trying to chat with a chatbot, it's because I've already done Control F on 10 different pages on the website and I can't find an answer. So when it reroutes me to some of the same non-answers, it's just incredibly irritating. Maybe other customers don't know the Control F function and do the research before reaching out, but I will say that personally, that's one of the most aggravating uses of it. There is a company, I think they're called Agent IQ, that personalizes that experience a little bit more, and it's kind of fun because they have a number of different agents. They'll tell you about the different agents that can handle your issue. And if you say, oh, this person's into phishing, and I think I'll be able to relate a little better with them. You can wait to speak to them, or you can speak to whoever's next in queue, and really taking a more personal approach, even if it just looks personal, whether it is or not, I think is a lot more effective than just regurgitating some of the same information that's on a website.
I want to add that's a very good example, and I want to add something to this that aligns with what I was saying, so we get a sense of what scenario-based testing would look like. So if I am in your shoes and we have a product that the vendor told me this product is for customer support chat is 99% good when it's responding to all these products issues, but these handful of products, it's really is not able to answer these questions. So with that kind of transparency in the quality of the product that I'm getting between you and your vendor, you can just implement some kind of triaging or rerouting that your human analyst only gets this kind of data or these kind of products, and the rest. So human in the loop and scenario level testing, all this stuff is just, let's remanage our work better. Then I will give the AI to automate things when it's good at it, and with things that it's not good at, I will still use human or use different approach with that.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that from a business perspective. The last two presentations I've done on AI, an AI created 95% of the presentation. I fully disclosed it at the end of the presentation, but it's great to not have to sit there and play with templates and play with verbiage. Having a fundamental to start. Obviously, it's always easier to edit than it is to create. So really being in a seat to be able to do that is phenomenal. From an HR perspective, I haven't had to write a job description in 24 months, probably. Or even a job posting. Speaking of postings, I hear some of you are using AI for LinkedIn. That one I think is debatable. But and obviously with some HR functions, you need to be a lot more careful. Amazon ran into this issue with some of their AI practices in hiring. So clearly there's areas that you can have more liberal use of it with human oversight. A lot of human oversight, and areas that are just, you have to be incredibly careful to dabble in.
And, I'd say you can actually avoid having a lot of human oversight. You have one person who is ultimately responsible for an AI component. And it used to be a joke that like someone could be a VP of going to jail. So if you're using AI for an important function, then there should be someone who owns that and owns that if it goes wrong. I don't know if anyone, we have any New York bankers here, but there's a regulation in New York called DFS 504, which requires a senior, I had to sign that when I was in banking, requires someone to sign off on a bank's screening posture. So we configured our system. This is our risk tolerance. We tested it. And the investment that I saw in compliance technology before versus after that, it was a huge change because now someone had to personally sign and say, I am responsible for this. And that person had to be an executive. And so that meant that suddenly resources were allocated. And so instead of saying like, hey, we should have, at every level, like this amount of human control. No, instead make one executive the person who goes to jail. I'm not saying people should be, but someone who gets in trouble, and then give that person authority and resources.
Testing. This brings back memories for me and probably Annalisa and Jeff's here as well. But from our kind of fintech enabling banking days when we worked with a lot of startups and a lot of fintechs at another organization that we worked at, one of the diligence requirements was, to your point, you needed to have a chief compliance officer that signed off on a lot of these kind of policies, kind of program standards and so on. So my question, I guess, is so now, fast forward, we're leaning in a little bit more into AI. Do these individuals need to be more technical? Do they need to be more technically savvy? Whereas before, they were just great compliance people, and they had really solid, resumes and really great expertise on, and had all their certifications.
I'm going to save a lot of time on my answer and just say no.
Okay.
But,
why? Tell me why no.
The best AI researchers, they're going to be building the models. They just quite simply, like, for those who work with engineers a lot, they don't want to be chief compliance officers.
Right.
So you're just going to have a misalignment of the talent that has AI understanding. But
I thought you would just add it to their skill sets, right?
The what?
I thought the chief compliance officers would just add it to the skill set. I think, and I think they would be pushed by the market regardless of regulations. That
it would be like I have a LinkedIn certification in AI. So
well, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but are you saying that then that when Annalisa, for instance, is looking at partners for that have AI included in them, that they should be easily to digest by a non-AI person?
Yeah, 100%. Like to your point about explainability, like if you're working with, if you're the chief compliance officer and you are buying AI technology, it's unreasonable to expect anyone that is not an AI researcher to understand it fully. But did you pick vendors or do you pick technology that you can explain to regulators?
My opinion on that may differ a little bit because I think perhaps a combination of both will be ideal. You need to have somebody who's primarily a chief compliance officer, understands the regulations, the implications, and the downstream impact. But I want to see the guts, right? I want to see how did this all come together. Here's the end result, and here's where we're having problems. But if a chief compliance officer cannot troubleshoot step 3 because they don't have a fundamental understanding of it, then fixing the problem, I think, will be a lot more challenging. So maybe a marriage of the two.
Go into the Thunderdome with you here. I think just the salary requirements for a person that is suited to be a compliance officer and understands LLMs well is like well above $1 million. And most, just for those that are tracking, like AI, OpenAI, right? They raised enormous amount of money just now, largest VC raise ever. They're paying AI researchers over $1 million a pop. So kind of compliance officers, especially CCOs, already make a good amount of money. Add on, LLM expertise, and
I think you're just, it's like you're saying you don't need to learn spreadsheet to be in your job, right? Because AI is like a tool, like a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
You don't need a researcher in AI. You don't need a researcher in spreadsheets, but you need to understand how can you be a leader in anything? Can decide I'm going to implement this technology in my application. How are you going to choose the right technology, the right application? I feel like there will be a big gap in if you don't understand the technology. You don't need to be a researcher. Just a course of a month, Coursera and stuff. That's good enough to give you understanding what is AI and how to manage a product that's in AI in your stack.
And I'm sure that gap will continue to decrease, right? As we all kind of mature and our understanding matures of AI and large learning models, or whatever it is that your technology may be using, that you're sharing with your bank partner, your fintech partner. Ultimately, we will continue to mature and learn and know more. And those compliance individuals, maybe they won't be engineers and they won't be technologists, but effectively they'll be able to grab their hands around the product and be able to articulate and speak to it. So I do see that as being something that continues to change and evolve. Are there any other trends that you see kind of coming when it comes to the kind of the intersection of compliance, automation, and the either bank or the fintech that you are partnering with?
Happy to jump on this one. Suspicious activity reports were mentioned a couple of times earlier. Anything that is essentially synthesizing information and turning it into a report is already being done, in some cases with the knowledge of regulators, in some cases without, in some cases with their approval, in some cases without. But it is being done at almost every single organization that files SARs. And in some cases, we've seen analysts that, let's say, don't have approval from their management to do it, but it's easier for them to do their job. So that creates kind of an information security risk. But the biggest trend is just reporting is going to go the way of AI, period. And for there, you don't necessarily need a really complicated large language model. You need something that can synthesize text. And that's a lot cheaper to train. I mean, the biggest trend I just say is within financial crime compliance, reporting is going to go away, and those jobs are going to go away.
Anybody else? Trends, common themes that you're seeing that without saying the word regulator?
I'll just state the obvious. It's like, that's why I was talking. I had to push back on Peter's because AI is going to be like literally everything, everywhere, in everything. And I don't think I need to make the case. We all see it everywhere now, and all the tools that we're using is going to be talking about something. All the tools we're using is going to be, the documents that we're reading is going to be written by AI, and it's going to be read by AI. It's going to be analyzed by AI, and we're going to be supervising. It's not necessarily like replacing humans, but I feel like AI is going to be like everywhere now, and we have to be. That's the pattern I saw, and then we have to be ready for it in everything from data privacy to model security and adversarial attacks and all the kind of stuff there, and actually our knowledge as well with the tools.
So I'm going to wrap up with maybe a hard question. Often there's been concerns about AI also introducing a little bit of bias into, within the overall compliance process. How do you see, what are some ways to ensure fairness within the models that you're using, specifically within your products? And then how do you address concerns from regulators who may be resistant because, of what I mentioned earlier?
I think it's not just concerns. There's pretty well documented cases. The Brookings Institute put out a paper, and this is back in 2019, about some of the models and the impact the disparate impact that they have on a community. Wow, I got cut off already. It's fine. So I think we're already seeing that, and we've seen that throughout. Are we going to test it again? Yes. And we've seen that throughout. So how do you minimize that impact is just post-production testing and continuing to test and continuing to review models to ensure that you're not getting into some of those same situations. But I think some of the issues have been really well documented, and that's been the reason for some of the regulatory focus in this space. Again, there were so many clients and companies that would come and say, well, we have this phenomenal proprietary model, and because of that, it gives us a competitive advantage. That's lovely. In this space, in this regulatory environment, that just doesn't work anymore.
Did anyone have a chance to hear Kareem from Fair Play speak earlier? He was talking about how you can have a model, say cars that have more mileage, higher insurance premiums, and then there was something else, but it's in two completely non-racial factors ended up segmenting a very racially distinct population. So you can have risks that violate various laws that happen by accident, but also there was a case with Citibank a while ago. They got fined where a department in Los Angeles said, hey, we just don't want to lend to Armenians. And they had a written policy that said, if someone's last name is like Sarakian, Degargarbedian, just don't lend to those people. And so you had a team within a bank that was already violating the law. So if you were already violating the law, the problem is going to get a lot worse. And I think we do have guardrails against this, but I want to take this to kind of a similar example of new technology in banking, in finance, high frequency trading that allowed folks and traders to beat others very quickly and to make trades faster than you could blink. And there's a case of Knight Capital where there was an algorithm that misfired and the company lost $400 million in a blink of an eye. And so now with LLMs, you can make mistakes like that at scale, which is not, and it's something anyone asked for. So kind of when we are looking at these models, I would again say having someone that is responsible, you're a VP of going to jail for AI, and kind of giving that person the power and resources to staff their team.
That'll be a fun job description for
Yeah,
ChatGPT to
That's
write.
right.
All right. Well, we can open up for questions. If anybody has, yeah, please go ahead.
When do you see what sort of boxes would need to be checked before we see AI and large language models going from that kind of co-pilot, I'm making a recommendation that this guy goes to jail because he's ultimately the one that is signing off on the opinion versus actually making the decisions? What sort of things would need to be set in stone and you feel good about before AI is really making decisions instead of
And for us, we're already comfortable doing that, and we've talked to regulators, and they're comfortable with us doing it because we have very narrowly scoped what we're doing. So I think the more narrow the scope of the problem you're solving, the more comfortable there. So, for example, let's say enriching and standardizing data across from billions of data points. That is something that a human can't do. Regulators are comfortable with that if you can show them and explain it to them. Decisioning alerts, like this name matched with this name, but it's a false positive because this is different. Provable, explainable, suspicious activity reporting. We're taking and synthesizing data. Here's 1,000 examples of what we did. So I think as long as the use case, like to your point earlier, 100% is not going to happen. 100% doesn't happen with humans. But did you pick a narrow use case and can you show it repeatable? I think that's enough for us and honestly for clients and regulators as well, most importantly.
Anybody else? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I think I learned a lot. Appreciate the panelists joining as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.